Joining me now is the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. Thank you so much for being here, Your Royal Highness.
My pleasure.
I want to start, if I can, with the deaths of the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and the foreign minister in that helicopter crash a week ago, and your thoughts about the impact that could have on Iran's domestic and foreign policies, or does it have any impact at all?
Basically, every aspect of politics in Iran is ultimately controlled by the supreme leader, especially when it comes to foreign policy. So I don't think there's going to be much of a change in terms of the replacement to Mr. Raisi. It's probably going to be more of the same, and Khamenei has maintained consistently the same position he has over the last 3 decades. And I think we shouldn't anticipate any shift from that particular policy.
How were those deaths viewed inside Iran, from what you've heard?
Well, from what we get from Iranian social media, there was many celebrations across the country with fireworks, with people distributing sweets to one another, and being relieved that one of the most sinister characters of this regime that has been directly responsible for the death of thousands of Iranians under his watch has met his maker. We only feel that we wish he was there to witness the downfall of the regime and be held accountable for his crimes. But this is now water under the bridge. The fight continues for many Iranians to liberate themselves, and we'll continue fighting until the day we are liberated from this regime.
And I do want to talk more about where you think that's at, but I also want to talk about the Middle East a little bit, because the Supreme Leader met with the leader of Hamas in Tehran for that funeral. Obviously, the Iranian government supports Hamas. What is your view about the role that Iran is currently playing in that war, and then I guess the proxy wars happening around it?
Well, obviously, the approach that Khamenei had, calling it neither war nor peace, is basically a justification of proxy wars that he has maintained throughout these last at least 30 years since the end of the Iran-Iraq war. The regime has been fortifying its proxies and has financed them, traded them, equipped them with weapons and all sorts. And as a result, we've seen that its means of interfering in the region and trying to establish its own hegemony under a Shiite caliphate is really the mission of this regime from the time of the revolution. And as a result, they're using their proxies to bring even more instability and pressure in the region, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or Islamic Jihad or even the Houthis. This is part and parcels of the whole network of the regime's proxy involvement in our immediate region, and of course well beyond that with the IRGC that stretches all the way even to the Western Hemisphere in Venezuela and other places.
And where do you think the people of Iran stand, or what are they thinking about the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran right now?
I think the people of Iran have always tried to message the world that a liberated Iran, a democratic Iran, will seek only peace and good relations with our neighbors, whether it's the Arabs or the Israelis, completely different and opposite to what this regime has been standing for. In other words, the only way that we can eliminate the problems, including escalation of conflict, is by this regime no longer being in power.
Yes.
The guarantee of having an opportunity for the whole world to be released of the problematics involved with the regime, whether it's the nuclear threat, whether it is terrorism or radicalism spreading, is to put an end to it. And the regime has been the essential reason why we have the conflicts and as a result the escalation that are potentially down the road, unless we opt for a better solution. And that means investing on the people of Iran as the alternative at the end of the day, which is why I think the foreign policy of many governments, including the Canadian government, should be to directly support the Iranian people and bring as much as there is economic sanctions to put pressure on the regime, but parallel to that, a policy of maximum support, so you can give the people an equal footing and feel to be able to fight against an extremely repressive regime.
And you were recently in Canada, and I believe you met with some government officials. What was that the message that you sent to them? And what does that look like for Canada to directly support Iranians without that being caught up in support of the regime?
Well, first of all, I'd like to offer my appreciation from the statement coming from Prime Minister Trudeau that rather than sending condolences, it was a message of support to the Iranian people, which is what we expect for democratic leaders. But I think Canada could do even more. I think one of the key issues on the table is the inscription of the IRGC as a terrorist organization. This is something critical because if you look at it, IRGC has been the main operating mechanism for the regime, whether it's repression at home or interference abroad. That is additional pressure on the regime, but it will also send a strong signal to the Iranian people that we are taking measures. And beyond that, and I think depending on which political party is more inclined to do that, one of the key issues in Canada in particular is the money laundering operations by the regime. These are issues that have to be dealt with politically. You know, my approach to foreign governments and political parties has been an expectation of multi-partisan or bipartisan support. It should not be exclusively one party when it comes to human rights and liberty, although some parties respond more than others. But in general, I think Canada is so far showing at least the correct approach, but we hope that they will be able to do even more. I think if the precedent is set, and that should also be in the case of the G7, it will be critical to have the inscription of the IRGC as a terrorist organization. It's been legislated for, but governments have to make the final decision.
Yeah, there was a motion where it was voted on in Parliament here, although that's not binding for the government. And one of the, I'm sure you know, one of the reasons the government has given for not doing that is the complexity in labeling who you would go after, given that you are forced to participate. You are forced to participate in military service in Iran. Do you understand that reasoning, or do you think that they are making it more complicated than it needs to be?
There's a possible answer to that problem in the sense that you could say, as of now, whoever continues enlisting with the IRGC will be subject to that. But those who prior to that have been in there and are now, residents in Canada, it may not necessarily have to apply to them retroactively. So that's one way of satisfying the concerns of government that hesitate doing that because of that issue, but at the same time, it doesn't eliminate the fact that we have to hold the IRGC accountable. This may be a way around it, and I don't know if that's something that could be implemented or not.
What needs to happen in order to make sure that the war we're seeing play out in Israel and Gaza doesn't become a broader regional war, and that Iran doesn't get drawn in or decide to get involved? What kind of things need to happen from the international community?
Looking beyond the status quo and limiting your options to either diplomacy, which has failed, and conflict, military intervention, which is not desirable. And as a result, you're faced with only one possibility that remains, and that is direct support to the people of Iran as the agent of change. And it starts from the inside of the country. It doesn't require any foreign intervention or military operation if you opt for that strategy. On the other hand, if the Iranian people are not given the proper support, then you have other options that are less desirable still lingering around. All of us want to avoid conflict because that's definitely lose-lose. I honestly believe that the only win-win solution for the world and the Iranian people at the same time is to get rid of this regime. So there has to be ultimately a decision made about regime change. Why do I say that? Because the expectation of the free world until now was based on the false premise of expecting behavior change by the regime. And behavior cannot change for this regime because in its DNA, it is what it is. They're not about to change face. You cannot turn a wolf into a sheep. You cannot redesign and genetically change that. That won't ever happen. So therefore, rather than lingering on expecting that attitude to a behavior to change, the solution is the regime itself has to no longer be there. So regime change ought to be the final solution. That's what the people of Iran are crying for. 80% of Iranian society are done with this regime. They want to go beyond this regime. I hope the world acknowledges that this is ultimately the desire of freedom-seeking Iranians and to be supportive of that and be on the right side of history.
Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for making the time. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.